I've spent 10 years in the Marine Corps, 4 years working with the Air Force as a civilian, doing experimental testing on aircraft. Since my Marine Corps days, I was a pilot in the service and a fighter pilot, and fought in World War II after the latter part of World War II and the Korean War conflict. After I got out of the Marine Corps, I took a job with the Air Force at Wright-Patterson, doing experimental flight testing on various different modifications and tech orders that they had incorporated into aircraft, various different aircraft, F-89, back then the B-47, F-102, and those aircraft. While I was at Wright-Patterson, of course, I was approached by an individual that, and I'm not going to mention his name, to determine if I wanted to work in an area on just new creative things, okay? And apparently that was the flying disc simulator. What they had done, they had selected several of us, and they reassigned me to Link Aviation, which was a simulator manufacturer. At that time, they were building what they call the C-11B and F-102 simulator, B-47 simulator, and so forth. And they wanted us to get the experience before we actually started work on the flying disc simulator, which I spent 30-some years working on. The simulator wasn't actually functional until around 1958, where the simulator was actually operable. Craft that they used to build, which is a 30-meter one, was the one that crashed in Arizona, Kingman, Arizona, back in 53 or 52. I think it was 53. That's the one they used. That's the first one that they took out to the test site. It landed about 15 miles from, which used to be an Army air base, which is now a defunct Army base. I forget, I can't recall the name of it. But that particular craft, there were some problems with, number one, getting it on the flatbed to take it up to Area 51. They couldn't get it across the dam because of the road. It had to be barged across the Colorado River at the time, and then taken up to where people go now, up 93, out to Area 51, which was just being really constructed at the time, and taken down those dirt roads and out to that particular area of the test site. There were 4 aliens aboard that thing, and those aliens went to Los Alamos, and they put certain people in there with them, people that were astrophysicists, just general scientists, to ask them questions. The way the story was told to me was there was only one of them that would talk to any of these scientists that they put in the lab with them. Only one of the aliens. The rest wouldn't talk to anybody, or even have a conversation with them. First they thought it was all ESP, or what do I want to say?
Telepathy?
Yeah, mental telepathy. But most of that is kind of a joke to me, because they actually speak. Maybe not like we do, but they actually speak and can converse. The difference between this aircraft or this disc and other discs that they had looked at was that it was much simpler design. In the simulator, it was one big thing different. The thing that, like, Lazar calls the reactor. Okay, we didn't have a reactor. We had a space in a thing that looked like the reactor, but that wasn't the thing we operated the simulator with. We operated with 6 large capacitors that were charged with 1 million volts each. Say there were 6 million volts in those capacitors. They're largest capacitors ever built. these particular capacitors, they last for 30 minutes. So you could get in there and actually work the controls and do what you had to get the aircraft or get the simulator, the disk to operate, okay? Actually, when it was operable, it would lift off the ball about a certain amount of there was a dimension there that we had that it actually lifted up, and it could actually turn, you know, a certain amount of degrees left to right or whatever. In a simulator now, you'll notice that there are no seat belts, right? And the same thing with the actual craft, no seat belts. You don't need seat belts because when you fly one of these things upside down, there's no upside down like in a regular aircraft. You just don't feel it. You have your own gravitational field right inside. So if you're flying upside down, to you, you're right side up. There weren't any windows. The only place we had any visibility at all, and it was done with cameras or video type things at that time, was in the turret section. It takes a lot of time because of the area and the smallness of it. Just to raise your hand, it becomes complicated. You have to be trained with your mind, you know, to accept what you're going to actually feel. And
so there's some
experience.
Perceptual distortion.
There's a lot of distortion.
Yeah.
Seeing, just moving about. It's a. After a while, after you get used to it and all, and you do it, it's simple. You got to know where everything is, you know, and you got to understand what's going to happen to your body. It's no different than, you know, accepting the G-forces, you know, when you're flying a aircraft or coming out of a dive, you know, and that kind of thing. It's a whole new ballgame.
Did our flight crews ever take one of these discs out into space?
You know, I don't know that. I don't really know that. I'm sure they have. I'm saying it probably took a while to train enough of the people or sufficient time. The whole big problem with this, with the disc, is that it's so exacting in its design and so forth, and it can't be used, say, with it can't be used as a like we use aircraft today with dropping bombs and you know, having machine guns, you know, in the wings and that kind of stuff. The design is so exacting that you can't add anything. You can't. It's got to be just right. There's a big problem in the design of where things are put. Say, you know, that where the center of the aircraft is and that type of thing. Even the fact that we raised it 3 feet so the taller guys could get in and stuff. The actual ship was extended back to its original configuration, but actually raised. We had a long period of introduction into meeting, you know, say an EVE, an alien. And I called him J-Rod. Of course, that's what they called him, but that wasn't his, you know, I don't know if that was his real name or not, but that's the name that the linguist gave him, you know. So he knew J-Rod, you know. And I did draw a sketch of him when he was, before I left him in a meeting, but, and I provided it to some people, but that was my impression of what I saw. He'd sound just like, if you spoke, he'd sound like you. You know, he's like one of the, you know, a parrot, you know, but he'd try and answer your question, you know. A lot of times you'd have a hard time understanding, you know, because if you didn't put it on paper and explain yourself, half the time he couldn't give you a good answer. Well, the preparation was, you know, basically going through. First of all, I went through all of the different nationalities in the world, right? Just, you know, these whatever, you know.
Human nationalities.
Yeah, human nationalities, you know. Then they got into going into other forms of life, even down to, animals and that type of thing. And the fact that, this J-Rod his skin was pinkish, but a little bit rough, and that kind of stuff. Not horrible looking, or to me, he didn't look horrible looking. Some of the guys, that was in the particular groups that I was in, they never even made it, as far as I was concerned. When they gave you the psychological question, I just answered them the way I felt, and I had no problem, And that's what they wanted to know, if you'd become, like, hey, here's an alien, he's from here, and I don't know what, one of those kind of things, But it never bothered me, it didn't amount to much.
So what kind of scientific advice he would give the crew that was building or back engineering these?
Basically, it was only engineering advice or science advice. Say, for example, I performed the calculation, and I spoke of a book that, it's not a book, it's a big assembly of various different divisions of on gravitational technology, okay? And the key element in there, all the information wasn't there, because even our guys, our people that were the top mathematicians and stuff, couldn't figure some of this stuff out. So we would take it, and then, we'd have to, with each design, there's a requirement for calculations. And we'd have to prove by calculations, that this thing's going to operate. No different than anything else we do. And sometimes you get into a spot where you try and try and try, and even if you use the formulas to come up with this thing that they provide you, it wouldn't work. And that's where he'd come in, to tell him to look at this and see what we did wrong. The last 40 years or so, or 60 years, maybe there's, I'd say 40 years anyway, not counting the simulators, I'm talking about actual craft, there's probably maybe 2 or 3 dozen various different sizes
That we've built, or that we have
that we built.
Okay.
I don't know much about the ones that, that they brought here. I know about that one out of Kingman, but that's about it. And I know the company that hauled it out of there and who's out here now. A couple different versions that they used. One was a chemical version. One was a solid version. And I don't even know the chemistry of the chemical version. But there's one that operates with under chemicals, with certain chemicals. Actually, what they've done I think with these triangles that people have seen is they've got like 2 or 3 of, say, a 30-meter crafts that are in the center of it. And the outside perimeter, you could put anything you want as long as these particular ones meet the design criteria. They'll operate. Then it's more or less all that other stuff on the outside is tag along.
Mm.
But I'm sure if they put a large weapon up there and fired it, it would probably, not work, or they'd kill themselves. There are certain reasons for the secrecy. I could understand that. No different than, the first atomic bomb that they built. But they're getting so far ahead now with aircraft design, and people have come up and they're visualizing and seeing some of the design aspects that are put in some of the aircraft today. And eventually, I'm saying, like I told you gentlemen earlier, that 2003, most of this stuff will be out in everybody's plate to look at. Maybe not the way that everybody expects it, but in some manner they determine appropriate, to show everybody, hey, look at what we got.
So
big surprise.
you think this is the year 2000 that we're doing this interview. So you think within 3 years that the public will be told something?
I said this years ago, 2003. And the reason why I said that, the document I signed ends in 2003.
And you're not the only one that signed.
And I'm not the only one.
Yeah.
See, this I call it FOGIT, or that's what they call it, fundamentals of gravitational, techniques basically. But it's a volume. Now, I'm sure that manual now is just expanded, or no different than anything else that they build for design criteria, because anything we do today, we have to have a design criteria manual, and they put all the information in that. And if you ever get one of these volumes of these documents, you'd be on top of the world.
There are those who feel that the government had hardware. Gordon Cooper, again, indicated that he has heard some highly placed rumors concerning crashed UFOs, a retrieval, he says, not only of just the UFO, but remains of bodies. I came closest to a report like this, talking to an individual at GTE who holds a high managerial position, who has a top secret clearance, and who worked as a civilian for the Air Force back in 1953. And his expertise was landing gear and also assessing the damage done to crashed aircraft. And he was on loan to the Atomic Energy Commission out at Frenchman's Flats, Nevada at the time. And he was assessing damage done to bridges and different types of buildings that were subjected to atomic bomb tests from different heights. There'd be atomic bombs on towers and drop parachutes and so forth. And he claims that right in the middle of these tests that he was called away and told to report to a certain office that he was going to have to go on a 2-day mission to a 3-day mission for something that he couldn't write or talk about. And he claims, just briefly, the story goes like this. He was flown from Indian Springs Air Force Base to a civilian airfield in Arizona. I think it was Tucson or Phoenix. I can't remember. I'd have to look at the report. But at the airfield, he was met by an air policeman who escorted him to a military bus that had all the windows blacked out. He got on the bus, and he was told not to talk to anybody, to surrender all his valuables, which he did, and they put him in a cloth bag, put his name on it. A full colonel, after everybody was assembled, told them that they were going to go for a long ride, that they were not to talk to each other, that they were going to investigate the crash of a super-secret vehicle, which they couldn't talk about, and they had to take an oath. And when they finally got there, he thought they drove around for 2 or 3 hours. He didn't know they took his watch away. When they got there was a bright light on the bus, blinding bright light. And when it was his turn to get out, he says he couldn't see anything. This light was just blazing. And when they finally got behind the light, there was this 30-foot in diameter object shaped like a bowl, inverted upon a bowl with a slight rim around it with orifices. And he was told to determine the falling speed and forward speed at time of impact. And that was all. And he wasn't to ask any other questions about the object. He said that there were generators there were power cables going into the object, there was an opening, and there were people inside doing something. There was a tent pitched beside the object with remains of small beings, but he wasn't allowed to ask any questions and so forth. When he got back to the bus, they were all told, each person that went out and did their own thing, that they were going to go back and they were going to handwrite a report of their findings. They were not to type it. They were to call a number. It would be reported. That would be picked up, and they were sworn to secrecy. Now, that's just a peripheral summary of what this fellow told me. I conducted a character reference check, went all the way back from where he works at GTE now, all the way back to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, which was Wright Field in those days. Talked to people there, highly placed people who still there, knew this individual. Everybody gave him a clean bill of health. He didn't seek any publicity. There was a movie called Hangar 18 that came out, put out by Sun Classics, and they called me because they knew of this particular sighting that I had investigated. They offered this fellow money through me to do a documentary. He returned it down. He didn't want to compromise, the story at all in any way using his name because of his position at GTE and because what his peers would think of him because he had taken an oath. So You have highly placed rumors that they actually have crash retrieval cases. Whether they're true or not, we only can wait and see, but they come from people with impeccable credentials. I can assure you that your name will not be used.
They made up a name, Fritz, to protect the witness's true identity.
And I think the best place to do it probably would be my planetarium away from the kids and the telephone and things like that.
Waiting for his friend to arrive, Ray nervously fiddled with his telescopes. He remembered his extensive investigations into the man's reliability as a witness.
In the case of Fritz, I started in 1973, went all the way back through the various companies he worked for, right back to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, talked to people he worked with, and they all gave him a very clean bill of health. A reputable man, honest man, not the type that would fabricate a hoax, and a very efficient engineer, manager.
As the man arrived, Ray recalled the years his friend had wavered about breaking an oath of secrecy. He recalled their long arguments about a greater public good. Would the years of patient persuasion at last pay off?
As I understand it, Fritz, you were working for the United States Air Force.
The story began late one night in 1953 at Frenchman's Flat, Nevada. The man had been working as a consultant on blast effects of atom bombs when he was suddenly ordered to report for a new mission.
What happened after that?
We were put on a bus, which the windows were all completely covered with curtains and, in some cases, black paper taped to the windows. And we're driven for 3 or 4 hours, and we're not sure just where we were going. Several of us tried to guess where we might have been. We, at that time, came to the conclusion it was in the area of Kingman, Arizona.
After getting off the bus, as recreated here, the scientists were taken to an even more remote location. They had no idea exactly where they were or what they were about to see.
We were told that we had been selected for various technical specialties. And I was told that I was to ask any questions that had to do with dynamic loads and nothing more, and I wouldn't get any answers to any other questions. It looked like 2 saucers, I would call it, one on top of the other, inverted, probably 25 to 30 feet in diameter.
In terms of something known, what kind of metal would it look like?
Well, it would look like a brushed aluminum. I'm sure it probably wasn't that. I say that because I noticed no scratch marks. And anything that would penetrate into the sand 20 inches that way would certainly have some scratch marks.
No signs of buckling, fracture, or anything?
Not that I could see. I accepted it was probably some United States government vehicle, a highly classified vehicle. In fact, we were told that that's what it was. Interestingly enough, one of the questions I needed to know was what the mass of the vehicle was. Well, I can tell a lot of things from the penetration into the desert sand and so forth, but I needed to know the mass. And they told me that they weren't going to let me know that. They perhaps didn't even know themselves. There was also a tent, which I didn't get to look into, but one fellow whom I did happen to talk with briefly until they told us to stop talking, said that he had seen 2 bodies inside this tent, 2 alien-looking bodies. It was brown, leathery skin, had a silver, like a cap on, without a bill.
Like a skull cap?
Yes, like a skull cap. I realized what this really started to mean, but I also at the same time realized probably why the government was keeping it classified. There are a lot of things that could be changed by our culture or religions. There are a lot of things that could be affected by the release of information like that at that particular time.